What would you do if your own family threw you out of your house just hours after your husband's funeral? Called you a gold digger and gave you 30 minutes to pack your bags? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. But what they didn't know was that I had information that would change everything. By the time I was done, the people who thought they owned everything would realize they owned nothing, and the woman they called hired help would become their worst nightmare. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, because what happens next will shock you. The words hit me like ice water thrown in my face. Now that Richard is dead, pack your things and get out. This house was never really yours anyway. My stepdaughter Karen stood in the doorway of what had been my bedroom for 23 years, her arms crossed and a cruel smile playing on her lips. Behind her, her husband Steve nodded like some kind of backup muscle, as if throwing out a grieving widow required intimidation. 23 years. That's how long I'd been married to Richard. 23 years of loving his children like my own, paying for their mistakes, covering their bills, and trying to be the mother they'd lost when they were teenagers. And here they were, less than 24 hours after we'd buried him, treating me like I was some kind of stranger who'd overstayed her welcome. You heard what she said. Steve stepped forward, puffing out his chest like he was somebody important. Time to go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. We're being generous, giving you time to pack. I looked at Karen's face, searching for any sign of the little girl I'd helped raise. The same little girl whose homework I'd checked every night, whose tears I'd dried when boys broke her heart, whose college tuition I'd helped pay when her trust fund ran short. But all I saw was greed and something that looked like satisfaction. 30 minutes, Karen announced, checking her phone like I was some kind of appointment she needed to squeeze between more important things. Then Steve's calling the police. Mrs. Chun from next door was definitely getting her entertainment for the day. I could see her curtains twitching as she tried to get a better view of the drama unfolding in our front yard. I gave her a little wave. Might as well give her something worth watching. This is my father's house, Karen continued, her voice getting louder like she was performing for an audience. You were just the help who got lucky enough to marry him. The help. 23 years of marriage reduced to hired help. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood, but somehow managed to keep smiling. If only she knew what I knew. If only she had any idea what her father had really left me. I packed my suitcase in silence while they watched me like vultures waiting for roadkill to stop moving. Karen even followed me around the house, making sure I didn't steal anything, as if I'd want their cheap furniture and tacky decorations that I'd been too polite to replace over the years. Don't even think about taking any of Mom's jewelry, she snapped when I walked past the jewelry box that had belonged to Richard's first wife. I paused and looked at her with the sweetest smile I could manage. Wouldn't dream of it, sweetheart. The irony was absolutely perfect. If only she knew what Richard had really left me in that jewelry box and everywhere else. If only she had bothered to pay attention to anything beyond her own wants and needs for the past 2 decades. As I walked toward the front door with my single suitcase, Steve called after me. Don't bother coming back for anything else. We're changing the locks tonight. I turned around one last time and saw Karen standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, looking absolutely victorious. She actually smiled and waved goodbye like she was seeing off a houseguest who'd overstayed their welcome. That night, I cried myself to sleep in a cheap motel room that smelled like industrial cleaning products and broken dreams. But by morning, I had a plan. And unlike Karen's brilliant life strategies, mine was actually going to work. The bank opened at 9 sharp, and I was their first customer of the day. I'd brought my marriage certificate, identification, and 23 years of knowing exactly how my husband handled his finances. The manager, Mr. Rodriguez, had been working with our accounts for over a decade. When he accessed the estate records, his face went completely pale. Mrs. Anderson, he said carefully, like he was delivering news about a terminal illness. Your husband's attorney contacted us yesterday. The will reading isn't until next week, but I can share some information about accounts where you're listed as beneficiary. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Time to see just how wrong Karen had been about everything. You're the primary beneficiary on several major accounts, he continued, pulling up records on his computer screen. And there's a private investment portfolio in your name that your husband funded over many years. I stared at the numbers on the screen. Richard had been setting money aside for me for decades. Money that Karen knew nothing about. Apparently, the hired help was about to become very well compensated. There's something else, Mr. Rodriguez continued, dropping his voice to almost a whisper. Your husband added you as a signatory on the children's trust accounts last year. The records show some very unusual activity. Now this was getting interesting. Mr. Rodriguez's hands were steady, but I could hear concern in his voice as he spread transaction records across his desk. These trust accounts were meant to remain untouched until the children reached 25, but there have been significant withdrawals over the past year and a half. I scanned the numbers, and my blood ran cold. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been systematically transferred out of accounts that were meant to secure Richard's grandchildren's futures. Well. Karen had been busy while her father was dying. Who authorized these withdrawals? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your stepdaughter. As the appointed trustee, the records show educational expenses and emergency medical costs. He paused diplomatically. But what, Mr. Rodriguez? But the amounts far exceed any reasonable educational or medical expenses for children those ages. My mind was racing. Karen had been stealing from her own nephew's trust funds. The woman who'd just thrown me out for being a gold digger was literally a thief. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I need you to freeze those accounts immediately, I said quietly, and prepare documentation for the will reading. Of course, Mrs. Anderson. Might I also suggest you speak with your attorney about requesting a formal audit? Smart man. Please arrange that as well. I drove straight to Patricia Martinez's office. She'd been Richard's attorney for 25 years and had handled our wills, business documents, and all our estate planning. Her reaction to the trust fund situation was immediate and sharp. This is embezzlement, Ellen, she said, using my first name like she always did. Those accounts were specifically designated for the children's futures. Can Karen claim the withdrawals were legitimate? Not without receipts and documentation, which I doubt she has. Patricia pulled out a thick folder from her filing cabinet. Richard came to see me 6 months before he died. He was concerned about Karen's behavior and wanted to make sure you'd be protected. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Richard's shaky handwriting. He asked me to give you this after the will reading, but given what you've discovered, I think you should read it now. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Richard's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but his words were clear. My dearest Ellen, if you're reading this, it means my fears about Karen were justified. I've loved her all her life, but I can no longer ignore her sense of entitlement and the way she's treated you. Everything I built thinking of our future together. Use it wisely. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for accepting what you've earned through decades of love and loyalty. Richard. So my supposedly manipulative gold digging had earned me my late husband's entire fortune. What a scandal. Patricia, when is the will reading? Friday at 2. The entire family will be present. Perfect. That gives me 3 days to prepare. That afternoon, I called Riverside Academy, the private school where Karen's boys were enrolled. I'd been quietly paying part of their tuition for years through my personal account, something Karen had never bothered to investigate or appreciate. Mrs. Anderson, how lovely to hear from you. The headmaster greeted me warmly. I trust you're managing well despite your recent loss. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'm calling about the Mitchell children's tuition situation. Of course. We were sorry to hear about the missed payment last month. Financial difficulties during times of grief are certainly understandable. Missed payment. How very interesting. Actually, I need to discuss changing the payment structure. I'll no longer be covering the supplemental costs. There was a pause. I see. Should I contact Mrs. Mitchell about the full tuition amount then? That would be her responsibility, yes. By 3 p.m, my phone was ringing. What did you do? Karen's voice was tight with panic. The school just called about tuition. I stopped paying for something that was never my responsibility in the first place. You've been paying their tuition? The portion you couldn't afford, yes. For 3 years. The silence was absolutely beautiful. I could practically hear her brain trying to process this information. Ellen, we need to talk. Do we? Because yesterday you seemed quite clear that I wasn't family. We were emotional. Dad just died. And you threw me out of my own home. I'm not feeling very charitable today. Please, can we meet somewhere? Just to talk. I considered this. Karen was starting to panic, which meant she was finally realizing how much she didn't know. Time to let her sweat a little more. The coffee shop on Maple Street. Tomorrow at 10. Thank you. I hung up. Let her spend the night wondering exactly how much trouble she was in. That evening, I sat in my motel room reviewing bank statements and Richard's personal papers. He'd been meticulous about documenting Karen's behavior over the years. Dates, incidents, conversations. It painted a picture of a daughter who'd never learned to appreciate what she had, but also showed a father who'd never stopped hoping she'd change. The will reading was going to be absolutely spectacular. Karen was already at the coffee shop when I arrived the next morning, hunched over a cup that looked like it had gone cold hours ago. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes were wrinkled, and she had dark circles under her eyes. Guilt and panic really don't do wonders for anyone's appearance. "Thank you for coming," she said without looking up. I sat down across from her and waited. Sometimes silence is the most powerful weapon you have. "I've been thinking about what you said. About the tuition." She finally met my eyes. "I didn't know you were helping with the payments. I thought the trust fund money was covering everything." "The trust fund money you've been withdrawing illegally?" Her face went completely white. "How did you know about that?" "Your father made me a signatory on those accounts. I can see every transaction, Karen." I smiled sweetly. "Turns out the hired help has access to all sorts of interesting information." She started crying then, but these weren't the angry tears from yesterday. These were desperate, frightened tears. Amazing how quickly crocodile tears appear when someone's caught red-handed. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. "How far was it supposed to go?" "Steve's business was failing. We were behind on mortgage payments. The kids' school costs were piling up, and Dad was so sick he wasn't paying attention to the finances. So she decided to steal from her children's inheritance." I pulled out my phone and showed her the bank statements Mr. Rodriguez had provided. "Karen, you've taken nearly $280,000 from those accounts over 18 months. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Her face went from pale to green. "That's not possible," she stammered. $5,000 here for educational expenses that went to your mortgage payment. $8,000 there for medical emergencies that funded your vacation to Mexico. $15,000 for tutoring services that paid off Steve's credit cards." Each example hit her like a physical blow. I was almost starting to feel sorry for her. Almost. I was protecting the family. Your father's medical bills were covered by insurance. I have those records too. She buried her face in her hands. Oh God, what have I done? You've stolen from your own children and destroyed your relationship with the one person who could have helped you." "What do you mean?" I leaned forward. "Karen, did you ever wonder why your father married me? Because you were young and pretty and available. I was 27 when I met your father. He was 40, recently widowed with 2 grieving children who needed stability. I wasn't looking for a sugar daddy. I was working as a teacher, putting myself through graduate school." Her expression shifted slightly. "Facts have a way of ruining perfectly good assumptions. Your father didn't need my money. He needed someone who could love his children as much as he did. Someone who would put family first, always. But you never had children of your own. By choice. Your father's family was my family. You and Michael were my children. Even when you made it abundantly clear I wasn't welcome." Fresh tears started flowing. "At this rate, she'd dehydrate. For 23 years, I've watched you struggle and never asked for help. I've paid for school supplies, birthday parties, emergency car repairs, and medical bills. Always quietly, always without making you feel indebted. Why? Because that's what mothers do." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Karen, the will reading is tomorrow. After that, everyone will know about the trust fund situation. Are you going to have me arrested? That depends on what happens in the next 24 hours. What do you want from me?" I stood up and gathered my purse. "I want you to be the daughter your father raised you to be. The woman he always believed you could become. I don't know how to do that anymore. Figure it out. You have until tomorrow at 2. As I walked toward the door, she called after me. "Ellen." "Yes. I'm sorry about yesterday. About all of it. I'm so very sorry." I turned back to look at her. Really look at her. For the first time in years, I saw not the entitled, angry woman who'd thrown me out of my home, but the scared 18-year-old who'd lost her mother and didn't know how to let anyone else love her. "I know you are. Now prove it." The will reading took place in Patricia Martinez's conference room with the entire Anderson family present. Karen sat between her brother Michael and her husband Steve, looking like she was facing a firing squad. Richard's siblings, Linda and Tom, sat across the table while I positioned myself closest to Patricia. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. "Before we begin," Patricia announced, I need to inform everyone that there's an ongoing investigation into irregularities with the children's trust accounts. Mrs. Anderson discovered unauthorized withdrawals and has requested a formal audit. Steve's face turned red. That's ridiculous. Karen was the appointed trustee. Being a trustee doesn't authorize personal use of trust funds, Patricia replied calmly. Karen had gone completely white. She'd had 24 hours to prepare for this moment, but clearly hadn't found the courage to confess to her family. Let's proceed with the will reading, Patricia continued. Richard Anderson's last will and testament, dated 6 months before his death. The basic provisions were straightforward enough. I inherited the house, the lake property, and 55% of Anderson Construction. Michael received 25% of the business and a substantial cash bequest. Karen received 15% of the business and her trust fund, what was left of it anyway. But then Patricia read the personal letter Richard had included. To my beloved wife Ellen, she began. You have been the light of my life for 23 years. You loved my children when they couldn't love you back, supported my business when times were hard, and cared for me through sickness with grace and devotion. Everything I leave you, you have earned 10 times over. Steve was scowling like someone had forced him to eat lemons, but Michael and Linda were nodding appreciatively. To my daughter Karen, Patricia continued, I love you deeply, but I cannot ignore your sense of entitlement or your treatment of my wife. Ellen has been more of a mother to you than you ever allowed her to be. I pray that someday you will see her worth and your own behavior clearly. Karen's tears were flowing freely now. Good. Maybe reality was finally sinking in. After the formal reading, the family began to disperse. But Steve wasn't finished making a fool of himself. This is insane, he exploded. She gets everything while the real children get scraps? Steve, Michael warned. Don't start. Start what? Telling the truth? She manipulated a sick old man. I'd had enough of this particular performance. Steve, would you like to explain to everyone how your wife spent her children's inheritance money? The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. What are you talking about? Linda asked. I pulled out the audit report that had arrived that morning. Karen has withdrawn nearly $280,000 from her children's trust funds over the past 18 months. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Michael stood up so fast his chair fell over. Karen, tell me this isn't true. Karen couldn't speak. She just sat there crying while Steve sputtered denials like a broken sprinkler system. The audit shows systematic withdrawals, I continued, thoroughly enjoying every second of this. Money that was supposed to fund the boys' college education went to cover mortgage payments, credit card debt, and personal expenses. Tom was reading over my shoulder, his face darkening with each page. Karen, these boys are my grandnephews. How could you steal from them? It wasn't stealing, Steve shouted. We're their parents. We have every right. No. Michael's voice was ice cold. You don't. Those accounts were specifically designated as untouchable until the children reached 25. Linda was staring at Karen in horror. How much is left? I consulted the report with theatrical precision. About $35,000 out of $315,000. The number hit the room like a nuclear bomb. I could practically see the radiation poisoning spreading across their faces. Karen finally found her voice. I was going to pay it back once Steve's business recovered. Or after Dad. After Dad what? Michael demanded. After he died and I inherited his money. Were they planning to steal from his estate too? Even as she protested, everyone could see the truth. Karen had been counting on inheritance money to cover her thefts. Unfortunately for her, she'd severely miscalculated who would be inheriting what. There's something else, I said quietly. Because why stop when you're having so much fun? The business has been carrying significant debt for the past 2 years. Debt that Karen, as financial manager, should have disclosed. Patricia nodded grimly. The company's accountant discovered irregularities there as well. Funds transferred to personal accounts, fake vendor payments, altered expense reports. Steve jumped up, swaying slightly. He'd clearly been drinking before the meeting. You can't prove any of this. Actually, we can. I handed him a copy of the criminal complaint I'd filed that morning. Embezzlement charges were filed this morning with the district attorney's office. Karen let out a sound of pure despair. Ellen, please. You said you'd give me 24 hours. I gave you 24 hours to confess to your family and take responsibility. Instead, you let your husband attack me and continued lying. Michael was looking at his sister like he'd never seen her before. Karen, how did it come to this? I don't know, she sobbed. Everything just spiraled out of control, and I didn't know how to stop it. Linda stood up, her face etched with disappointment. I think we've heard enough. Ellen, I owe you an apology. We all do. No apology necessary. You couldn't have known. As the family filed out, Karen caught my arm. Please, she whispered. Isn't there some way to fix this? I looked into her desperate eyes and felt something that might have been pity. Might have been. There might be, I said quietly. But it would require you to be completely honest with everyone. Your family, the authorities, yourself. I'll do anything. We'll see about that. Because if I knew Karen at all, she still had a few more lies left to tell. 3 weeks later, Karen knocked on my hotel room door at 7 in the morning. I'd moved to a nicer place downtown while house hunting, but was taking my time finding the right property. No rush when you're suddenly wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. I brought coffee, she said, holding up a carrier with 2 cups and a thick manila folder. And copies of everything. Everything turned out to be a complete financial confession. Every withdrawal, every forged document, every lie she'd told over the past 2 years. She'd also brought documentation of Steve's gambling debts, which explained where much of the stolen money had actually gone. How delightfully predictable. The prosecutor wants to meet with you tomorrow, she said, settling into the chair across from my small table. My attorney thinks if I cooperate fully and make restitution, I might avoid prison time. And Steve is no longer my problem. She held up her left hand, showing the absent wedding ring. I filed for divorce yesterday. Well, that was unexpected. Are you sure about this, Karen? He's been gambling away our future for years. The business failures, the constant need for money. It was all to cover his addiction. She took a shaky breath. I convinced myself I was protecting my family, but I was really enabling his destruction of it. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity. What I saw instead was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. Or really good acting. With Karen, it was always hard to tell. The boys don't know yet, she continued, about the divorce or the charges. I wanted to talk to you first. Why? Because they're going to need stability. They're going to need family who can help them through this. She pulled out another document. I want to sign over full custody to you. I nearly dropped my coffee. Even I hadn't seen this level of drama coming. Karen, that's not necessary. Yes, it is. I'm going to face criminal charges. Even if I avoid prison, I'll have a record. The boys deserve better than that. You're their mother. And I've been a terrible one. You've been paying their school tuition for 3 years. You remember their birthdays when I forget. You've been more of a grandmother to them than I've been a mother. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice was steady. I don't deserve them, but you do. I reached across the table and took her hand. Karen, what you've done is terrible, but giving up your children isn't the answer. Then what is? Taking responsibility, making restitution, getting help for the problems that led you here, and fighting every day to become the person your father believed you could be. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Do you think that's possible? After everything I've done, I think your father spent 23 years hoping for exactly this conversation. We sat in silence for a moment. I was actually starting to believe she might be serious about changing. Either that or she'd become a much better actress. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I need to tell you about Dad. My heart clenched. What about him? The last time I saw him conscious, he asked me to take care of you. He said you'd been the best thing that ever happened to our family, and he was worried about how we'd treat you after he was gone. Fresh tears started falling. I promised him I would. I looked my dying father in the eye and promised to take care of you. Her voice broke. And then I threw you out of your own house. Oh, sweetheart. I've broken every promise I ever made to him, but if you'll let me, I want to try to keep this one. I squeezed her hand. How do you propose to do that? By accepting the consequences of my actions, by trying to make things right, by proving that the daughter he loved is still in here somewhere. That afternoon, I called Michael to update him on the situation. She wants to give you custody of the boys? His voice was filled with disbelief. She's overwhelmed and scared. I think she believes it's the noble thing to do. What do you think? I think those boys need their mother to fight for them, not abandon them. Even after everything she's done, especially after everything she's done, they need to see that people can change, that mistakes don't define you forever. Michael was quiet for a moment. You're a better person than I am, Ellen. I'm not sure I could forgive her. I'm not sure I have yet, but I'm willing to try. What do you need from me? Help me convince her that running away isn't the answer. Those boys are going to need both of us to get through this. The next morning, I accompanied Karen to her meeting with the prosecutor. We sat in a sterile conference room while she detailed every financial crime she'd committed over the past 2 years. It was like watching someone perform surgery on themselves without anesthesia. Mrs. Mitchell, the prosecutor said when she finished, your cooperation is noted. However, the amount of money involved makes this a felony case. I understand, Karen replied quietly. Your attorney has proposed a plea agreement. 3 years probation, complete restitution, and 800 hours of community service. Karen looked at me questioningly. I nodded slightly. It was better than prison, which was where she deserved to be. I accept, she said. There's one more condition, the prosecutor added. You'll be required to attend financial counseling and submit to regular auditing of your personal finances for the duration of your probation. Of course. As we left the courthouse, Karen turned to me. Thank you for being there. This is just the beginning, you know. The hard work starts now. I know, but for the first time in years, I feel like I might actually be able to do it. That evening, we sat down with Danny and Alex to explain what was happening. The boys, now 14 and 16, were old enough to understand the basics. Your mother made some serious mistakes with money, I told them gently. She's going to work very hard to fix them, but it means some changes for your family. Are you getting divorced? Danny asked directly. Karen took a deep breath. Yes, your father and I are getting divorced. Because of the money stuff, because of a lot of things that have been wrong for a long time. Alex, the older boy, looked at me. Grandma Ellen, are you going to help us? The title still made my heart skip. Always. We're family no matter what. Good, he said simply. Because Mom's going to need help figuring out how to be normal. Out of the mouths of babes. Sometimes teenagers are the wisest people in the room. The house sold faster than expected. The new owners wanted to close in 2 weeks, which meant Karen had to find a place for her and the boys immediately. With her credit destroyed and facing criminal charges, options were limited. I found an apartment, she told me over coffee. This had become our weekly tradition. It's small, but it's clean and in a good school district. Can you afford it? Her face flushed. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I need a co-signer. I'd been expecting this. Karen, I can't enable poor financial decisions. I know, but I can't provide for my children without help. And I can't get help without proving I can provide for my children. It's a catch-22. She had a point, though it was amusing watching her discover how the real world works. Show me your budget. She pulled out a notebook filled with careful calculations. Her handwriting, which had always been chaotic, was now precise and methodical. Desperation really does wonders for organization. I'll be working 2 jobs. Bookkeeping for a small business during the day and tutoring math students in the evenings. The boys both have part-time jobs now. We can make rent and basic expenses, but we don't have the security deposits or first month's rent. I studied her numbers. They were realistic but tight. What about the restitution payments? $40,000 over 3 years. I've worked it into the budget. And Steve's support payments? Steve is bankrupt. There won't be any support payments. She'd done her homework. The budget was honest and achievable, but only barely. It was almost impressive how thoroughly she'd managed to destroy her financial life. If I co-sign this lease, what happens if you relapse into old behaviors? You mean if I start stealing again? I mean if you start making financial decisions based on what you want instead of what you can afford. She was quiet for a moment. Then you kick me out and take custody of the boys. Karen, no. I'm serious. That should be part of our agreement. If I screw this up, if I prove I can't be trusted, then you take them. They deserve stability more than they deserve their mother's pride. It was a sobering conversation, but also encouraging. The Karen who'd thrown me out of my house 6 months ago would never have considered putting her children's needs before her own ego. All right, I'll co-sign the lease, but I want monthly financial reports, and I want the boys to know they can come to me if things get difficult. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. I won't let you down. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've successfully lived within your means for a year. The apartment was indeed small, a 2-bedroom unit with thin walls and outdated appliances, but it was clean, safe, and walking distance from both boys' schools. After living in a 5,000-square-foot house they couldn't afford, this was quite the come-down. It's perfect, Danny announced as we toured the space. Way better than listening to Dad yell about money all the time. Alex nodded agreement. Plus, Grandma Ellen lives close enough to bring dinner when Mom burns stuff. I don't burn everything, Karen protested. Mom, you burned soup. Soup? I had to laugh. I'll teach you some basic cooking skills. I'd like that, Karen said quietly. Moving day was a family affair. Michael and Linda helped load boxes while Tom supervised the boys carrying furniture. It felt like the first normal family gathering we'd had in years. Well, normal if you ignored the criminal charges and divorce proceedings. This is nice, Linda commented as we unpacked kitchen items. Feels like we're actually helping instead of just watching disaster unfold. Karen's working hard to change, I replied. She deserves support. She deserves consequences too. But I'm glad you're helping her find a middle ground. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Karen and I sat on her new couch drinking tea from mismatched mugs. The furniture was secondhand and the decorations were sparse, but it felt more like a home than the fancy house ever had. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, she admitted. For you to change your mind and decide I don't deserve help. Why would I do that? Because I spent 23 years taking you for granted. Because I stole money and lied about it. Because I let Steve treat you terribly and never stood up for you. I set down my mug and looked at her seriously. Karen, do you know why your father fell in love with me? Because you were kind to his children? Because I saw potential in people even when they couldn't see it in themselves. Your father was a broken widower who thought he'd never love again. I saw the man he could become with support and patience. And you see that in me? I see a woman who's made terrible mistakes, but is willing to do the hard work of changing. That's more than many people ever manage. She started crying again. The woman had become quite the waterworks over the past few months. At this rate, I was going to need to buy stock in tissue companies. I love you, she whispered. I should have said that 23 years ago. But I love you. I love you too, kiddo. Always have. Even when I was being horrible? Especially when you were being horrible. That's when love matters most. The boys emerged from their shared bedroom where they'd been setting up gaming systems and debating furniture placement. Are you two having a moment? Alex asked suspiciously. Yes, I replied. Deal with it. Cool. Danny burned popcorn in the microwave. Can you teach him how to use it properly? How do you burn popcorn? Karen asked incredulously. Same way you burn soup, apparently, Danny replied. It's a family talent. That settles it, I announced. Cooking lessons start tomorrow. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. Karen was facing criminal charges and financial ruin, but for the first time in years, she seemed genuinely happy. Her children were speaking to her with respect instead of frustration. Her family was supporting her instead of enabling her. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. The phone call came at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. Karen's voice was tight with panic, which really isn't the best way to start your morning. Ellen, I need help. Steve showed up at the apartment last night. I was instantly awake. What happened? He was drunk and angry about the divorce papers. He started yelling about how this was all your fault, how you'd poisoned me against him. Because of course it was my fault. Everything always is, apparently. Are you and the boys okay? We're fine. He didn't hurt anyone, but he scared the neighbors. The police came and arrested him for violating the restraining order. Steve had been served with a restraining order the previous week after showing up at Karen's workplace demanding money. Apparently, he wasn't taking the boundaries seriously. What a shock. Where are you now? Still at the apartment. The police said it was safe, but the boys are rattled. Pack some bags. You're staying with me until this gets sorted out. Ellen, I can't impose. You're not imposing. You're accepting help from family. An hour later, Karen and the boys were settled in my townhouse. I'd only been living there for a month, but it already felt more like home than the house I'd shared with Richard. Amazing how much more relaxing life becomes when people aren't constantly trying to steal from you. This place is nice, Danny observed, examining my modern kitchen appliances. Everything actually works. And there's no holes in the walls, Alex added, referencing their father's tendency toward destructive outbursts. Karen looked embarrassed. The boys are still adjusting to how normal families live. Normal is overrated, I replied. But safe is non-negotiable. Over breakfast, we discussed the situation with Steve. His gambling debts had apparently worsened since the separation, and he was becoming increasingly desperate for money. Desperation makes people dangerous and stupid. He keeps saying the boys' trust fund money belongs to him, Karen explained. He can't understand that it's gone. Does he know about the criminal charges? He knows, but he thinks it's all a misunderstanding. He told the police that you manipulated me into confessing to things I didn't do. I nearly choked on my coffee. The audacity was breathtaking. Mark's version of reality has become flexible. He's convinced that you're the villain in this story. Well, at least he's consistent in his delusions. The boys were listening to this conversation with expressions of disgust that would have been funny under different circumstances. Dad's been acting crazy for months, Alex said bluntly. Even before you threw him out, Mom. He'd stay up all night gambling online, then sleep all day instead of working. We're glad you divorced him, Danny added. He was making everyone miserable. It was sobering to hear 14 and 16-year-olds speak so matter-of-factly about their father's dysfunction. But at least they were old enough to recognize toxic behavior when they saw it. That afternoon, Karen's attorney called with an update on Steve's arrest. He's being held overnight, she explained to Karen over the phone. But he'll likely be released tomorrow with additional conditions on the restraining order. What kind of conditions? No contact with you or the children. No approaching your residence or workplace. And mandatory attendance at Gamblers Anonymous meetings. Karen hung up looking worried. He's not going to follow those conditions. Steve doesn't think rules apply to him. She was right to be concerned. That evening, as we were finishing dinner, Steve called her cell phone 17 times in a row. When Karen finally answered to tell him to stop, his voice was loud enough for all of us to hear. You think you're so smart, hiding behind that old witch. But I know where you really are. I took the phone from Karen's trembling hands. Time to remind him who he was dealing with. Steve, this is Ellen. You? This is all your fault. You destroyed my family. Your gambling addiction destroyed your family. Karen and the boys are safe, and they're going to stay that way. I have rights. Those are my children. Those children have the right to live without fear, something they haven't had in years. I hung up and immediately called the police to report the violation of the restraining order. He'll be arrested again within the hour, the officer assured me. This time bail will be set higher. How long can this continue? Until he gets help or until he commits a more serious crime that lands him in prison long term. Not exactly reassuring, but at least he'd be someone else's problem for a while. 2 years after the will reading, I received an unexpected phone call from Steve. He'd been living in another state since the divorce, supposedly working on his gambling addiction and trying to rebuild his life. Or more likely, he'd run out of people to borrow money from and was expanding his search radius. Ellen, I need to talk to you about seeing the boys. You need to talk to Karen about that. I'm not their guardian. Karen won't take my calls. Have you considered that there might be a reason for that? There was a long pause. I know I messed up. I'm trying to make things right. Steve, what do you want from me? I want you to convince Karen to let me see my sons. I've been clean from gambling for 10 months. I have a steady job. I'm going to therapy. And you think that entitles you to access to children you terrorized? They're my children too. I took a deep breath and tried to channel the patience Richard always showed when dealing with difficult people. Though to be fair, Richard never had to deal with anyone quite this delusional. Steve, the last time you saw those boys, you were drunk and violating a restraining order. The time before that, you were demanding money and threatening their mother. Why should anyone trust you now? Because I've changed. So has Karen. The difference is she's been proving it through consistent actions for 2 years. You've been absent. I had to get my life together first. Fair enough. But getting your life together doesn't automatically restore relationships you damaged. That requires trust building, and trust building takes time. He was quiet for a moment. Will you at least ask Karen if she'd be willing to talk to me? I'll mention that you called. What she does with that information is up to her. That evening, I brought up Steve's call while Karen and I were reviewing her monthly budget, a practice we'd maintained even though she no longer needed oversight. Old habits die hard, especially when those habits involve preventing financial catastrophe. He wants to see the boys, I told her. Karen's expression tightened. What do you think I should do? I think you should ask Danny and Alex what they want. They're old enough to have opinions about their father. And if they want to see him, then you figure out a safe way to make that happen. Supervised visits, public places, clear boundaries. And if they don't want to see him, then you respect their choice and protect their right to feel safe. Karen was quiet for a long time, staring at her budget spreadsheet like it held the answers to life's greatest mysteries. 2 years ago, I would have said yes immediately because I felt guilty about the divorce. Or I would have said no immediately because I was angry about his behavior. And now I want to make the decision based on what's actually best for my children, not what makes me feel better about myself. That evening, Karen sat down with Danny and Alex to discuss their father's request. I stayed in the kitchen, giving them privacy but remaining close enough to provide support if needed. Dad wants to see us, I heard Karen explain. He says he's been working on his problems and wants to rebuild our relationship. What kind of problems? Danny asked skeptically. The gambling addiction, the anger issues, the financial irresponsibility. Has he paid back any of the money he cost us? Alex asked bluntly. Smart kid. Always goes straight to the money question. No. Has he apologized for scaring us? Not to you directly, no. There was a long pause. I don't want to see him, Danny said firmly. Maybe someday, but not now. Alex, Karen asked. Same. He made our lives miserable for years. 10 months of therapy doesn't erase that. Are you sure? He is your father. So, that doesn't give him the right to hurt us and then demand forgiveness when it's convenient for him. I was proud of both boys for their clarity and self-advocacy. They'd learned not to set themselves on fire to keep other people warm. 3 months later, Steve called again. This time, he'd completed a year of gambling addiction treatment and wanted to send letters to the boys. Letters might be okay, Karen mused after we discussed the request. It's less invasive than phone calls or visits. What would the boundaries be? No requests for money, no guilt trips about the divorce, no promises he might not keep. Just honest communication about his recovery and his feelings. She presented the idea to Danny and Alex, who agreed to try receiving letters with the understanding that they didn't have to respond if they didn't want to. The first letter arrived a week later. I was present when the boys read it, ready to provide emotional support if needed, or witness protection depending on how badly Steve had screwed it up. Steve's letter was surprisingly appropriate. He acknowledged his past behavior, took responsibility for the family's difficulties, and shared details about his recovery program without making demands or promises about the future. This is actually not terrible, Alex admitted after reading it twice. He didn't blame Mom for anything, Danny observed. That's different. Are you going to write back? Karen asked. Maybe. Let me think about it. That evening, Danny did write a brief response. 2 paragraphs explaining that he was doing well in school and appreciated his father's honesty about past problems. Alex chose not to respond, but he didn't throw the letter away either. Progress, Karen said simply. Slow progress is still progress, I agreed. 5 years after Richard's death, I stood in the backyard of Karen's new house, a modest 3-bedroom she'd purchased after being promoted to senior accountant at her firm. The entire Anderson family was gathered for the annual Richard Anderson Memorial Scholarship Barbecue, an event that had grown from a simple family dinner to a community celebration. Grandma Ellen, a small voice called out. I turned to see Emma, Michael's 4-year-old granddaughter, running toward me with a dandelion clutched in her tiny fist. For you, she announced, presenting the wilted flower with the solemnity of a state ceremony. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you. Emma beamed and ran off to find more flowers to pick, leaving me with a handful of weeds and a heart full of joy. Children have such a talent for finding beauty in the most unlikely places. She adores you, Linda observed, joining me at the picnic table where I was arranging Emma's botanical gifts in a plastic cup. The feeling is mutual. It's amazing how much this family has grown and changed, Linda continued, gesturing toward the crowd gathered in Karen's yard. 5 years ago, I wasn't sure we'd ever speak to each other again. I followed her gaze across the gathering. Karen laughing with Tom's wife while they tended the grill. Danny and Alex playing cornhole with their cousins. Michael pushing Emma on the swing set he'd installed that morning. Your brother would be amazed, I said. He'd be proud of all of us, but especially of you. Me. You held this family together when we were falling apart. You gave Karen consequences when she needed them and support when she was ready to change. You turned an inheritance dispute into a story about redemption. Karen did the hard work of changing, but you made it possible. There's a difference. Before I could respond, Karen approached with a young woman I didn't recognize. Ellen, I want you to meet Jessica Rodriguez. She's our first scholarship recipient to graduate college. Jessica was a petite young woman with serious eyes and a firm handshake. Mrs. Anderson, I can't thank you enough for the scholarship program. It literally changed my life. Tell me about yourself, I said, genuinely curious. I was 16 when my mom was arrested for drug possession. My dad had been gone for years, and I was basically raising my 2 younger sisters alone. I thought I'd have to drop out of high school to work full-time. What changed? Karen found me crying in the guidance counselor's office and told me about the scholarship program. She also told me about her own story, how she'd made terrible mistakes but found a way to rebuild her life. I glanced at Karen, who was listening with quiet pride. Karen convinced me to finish high school and apply for college. The scholarship covered tuition, and she helped me find a part-time job that worked with my class schedule. What did you study? Social work, just like Alex. I want to help other kids who are dealing with family crisis. And your sisters? They're both in high school now. Both honor students. They want to apply for Anderson scholarships when they graduate. Jessica's story was exactly what Richard had hoped for when I established the fund in his memory. Young people overcoming difficult circumstances through education and support. What's next for you? I asked. I start graduate school in the fall, and I'll be doing my internship with the County Family Services Department. Karen offered to be my practicum supervisor. I looked at Karen in surprise. You didn't mention you were supervising students. It's new. The university needed placement sites for students interested in financial counseling and family crisis intervention. Turns out my background makes me qualified to help. Your criminal background? My recovery background. There's a difference. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and we'd finished cleaning up, Karen and I sat on her back porch watching the sunset. 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years, I agreed. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't changed? If I'd kept lying and stealing and blaming everyone else? Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on alternate histories. I think about it all the time. How different everything would be if you'd just had me arrested and walked away. But you did change, and I didn't walk away. That's the history that matters. I used to think redemption was about earning forgiveness from other people. Now I know it's about becoming someone you can live with. I squeezed her hand. Your father would be so proud of who you've become. I hope so. I'm finally proud of myself. A comfortable silence settled between us as we watched fireflies begin to dance in the gathering dusk. Ellen, can I ask you something I've been wondering about for months? Of course. Do you ever feel like Dad set this whole thing up? Like he knew exactly what would happen when he changed his will? I considered the question. Richard had been a chess player, always thinking several moves ahead. It wouldn't surprise me if he'd orchestrated this entire drama from beyond the grave. I think your father knew his family well enough to predict how people would react to his decisions. You think he planned for me to steal the money and get caught? I think he planned for consequences to have meaning. Whether you learned from them or not was up to you. That's very wise of him. Your father was a wise man who loved his children enough to let them face the results of their choices. Karen was quiet for a moment, processing this. I'm glad he did. Even though it was the hardest thing I've ever been through, I'm glad it happened. Why? Because now I know who I really am when everything is stripped away. And I like that person. As the stars began to appear overhead, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. 5 years ago, I'd been a widow thrown out of her own home by ungrateful stepchildren. Tonight, I was surrounded by family who valued and respected me, watching those same stepchildren raise their own children with love and integrity. Karen. Yeah, thank you. For what? For becoming the daughter your father always knew you could be. For giving me the family I always hoped to have. For proving that people can change if they're willing to do the work. She leaned over and hugged me tight. Thank you for not giving up on me when I'd given up on myself. I love you, kiddo. I love you too, Mom. Mom. After 28 years, she finally called me Mom. Richard's plan had worked perfectly. The old schemer had gotten exactly what he wanted. A family that actually acted like family, a wife who was respected and loved, and children who'd learned that character matters more than entitlement. It only took embezzlement charges, criminal prosecution, and 5 years of hard work to get us here. But it was worth every minute. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.